We're going?
Okay.
Let's see. Alrighty. Wait, let me just grab my hat.
I will let you do that.
Yep. So,
Okay.
finally,
Yes, at long last.
this has been the culmination of now, what is it, 2 months of discussions?
Yeah, about that.
About 2 months of discussions. So, what I wanted to do in this first episode is I wanted us to introduce ourselves to whoever might be watching, to preface what's, I hope, is going to be an ongoing discussion series around the new legislation legalizing marijuana. It's the beginning of our professional relationship, which is the climax of a 20-year friendship.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, I've seen you, I've seen your career go through ups and downs from, working at a six-figure salary in a, major kind of corporate environment to building the company that you have now, which is your own, entrepreneurial thing.
Yes, indeed. I've seen you go from a teenager that I met in a bar, drinking underage, to surprising everyone and, going to Brook Law and passing the bar exam in one less try than it took John F. Kennedy's son to do.
Right, which he's saying I failed it the first time that I took it. It was
But it took
two times the charm.
JFK Jr. 3 times. I'm just saying.
So yeah, I mean, it's been a long road. Our friendship has had its ups and downs, and like any real friendship, but it's a whole new chapter. It's a whole new chapter in our, in America. With the, and especially in New York City, in New York, in the state that we live in,
I'm not going to lie. I did not think I would see the day when marijuana would be legalized in New York this soon. That I would see it, I figured. I figured the trend. I saw the trend coming. But this quickly, and as you and I have discussed, dude, you can't walk.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is like whether that's true or not, now that we're past that, I didn't expect to see the volume of people smoking who we're seeing. Like, I think the estimates in terms of annual sales and like it's just been completely underestimated.
Yeah.
I think that this has the potential to be, especially with the global trend towards legalization, maybe a $100 billion a year industry.
Because there's a lot. I knew that people were smoking on the down low. And people who seem straight-laced and straight edge and whatever have you. But you can't walk a block in Manhattan in any direction without passing people's spliff. Everyone from grandmothers and soccer moms to straight-laced, dorky-looking dudes to, the obvious people you'd suspect. And as you know, I stopped indulging in 2016, but dude, I practically get a contact high just walking 5 blocks in the city anymore.
Yeah. As we're talking, since this is the first episode, we're getting our bearings straight. We're learning to negotiate. I just want to make sure everything is going smoothly, and it is. So we're just...
This is a first-time podcast, folks, so, this is real, low budget, low key. We're not trying to be Hollywood slick or anything. So.
No, but what we are doing though is we're having a conversation that no one else is having.
Yes.
Which is we are analyzing the legislation that has just passed. And I mean, like this is for those of you tuning in, the legislation that passed is like a 150-page document. I mean, it's simpler than other pieces of, like the criminal code, for instance, is a gigantic document. The tax code is even bigger than that. This is a relatively short piece of legislation.
As far as legislation goes.
As far as legislation goes, right? I mean, in other words, 150 pages is accessible. You can sit down and read that beginning to end. In other words, if we were try to analyze the tax code verse by verse, we'd be here for 100
The never-ending story.
Right.
But tell them what it is we're going to do.
Well, so that's what I'm doing. So what we want to do is we want to analyze the statute literally from beginning to end. Yes. Who were the people who pushed it, who fought for it to get passed? What is each chapter and verse, and what does that mean for the marijuana operator? Yeah. And so what we want to do is we want to analyze that. But the other thing that we're doing that's also very essential, and we don't want to lose sight of, is we're now in the marijuana consulting business. This is our business plan.
It's our partnership.
This is our partnership. This is we're taking the masks off. We're not wearing a suit and tie. This is how we are all the time.
Regular selves,
This
folks,
is,
real faces.
we're not selling anything. We're not selling any bullshit. Excuse
Right.
me. We're being completely transparent, and what we want to do is we want to, for lack of a better term, penetrate the marijuana industry,
Yes.
and we have a strategic vision for what marijuana operators should be doing that other marijuana consultancies
Right.
in Colorado and California are not talking about. So this is the beginning
Yeah.
of that discussion. How do we, as a marijuana operator, how do you go from, operating in a black market
Yeah.
where evasion is the rule of law, so to speak, to now,
The rule of outlaw.
right, to now functioning within the marketplace as tax-paying citizens, essentially.
Because we see ourselves, look, full disclosure, folks, we're born-again capitalists. We're in it because there's an opportunity for us to make a profit. Having said that, we also see ourselves as advocates, which is something look, I got to give credit. Sean's the lawyer here. I'm the tech guy and the web developer and the business development advocate. In the consultation and the sort of, advanced reconnoitering that he's done, we found that a lot of people who are in this sort of element of it, consulting, the people who are in the consulting end of it, they're just in it to charge a fee to process the paperwork.
The application.
They make no guarantees. They're not against anybody, but they're on the side of them making a buck because that's what they do.
Well, but they're also on the don't ask, don't tell.
Yes.
side. In other words, to just kind of give the highlights of the highlights of the highlights, the legislation is passed. So now if you're in the street puffing away, there's no consequences for that at all. Okay. In order to be selling or growing in the state of New York, you need a license.
Yes.
In order to get a license, obviously, the state has to give you one. So they're about 12, for reasons that we'll talk about another time, they're about 12 to 18 months away from that. The question then for you as the marijuana operator is what do you do in that 12 to 18 month period before you can even apply for a license? The other consultancies in Colorado and California and states with jurisdictions where it's legal are saying, prepare to apply for a license, everything else don't ask, don't tell, because we don't want to be perceived as, participating in a conspiracy.
Proponents of illegal activity.
And what we're essentially saying, and I think it's going to be more complicated than how I'm about to articulate it, is that is wrong. The legislation was passed to protect you and to help you and to create this industry and to transition this industry from the black market into the white market. And the legislature is not looking to punish people right now. They're looking to, they know that they know that this is complicated.
Right.
So what we're saying is do it openly, do it honestly, put together an escrow fund for your taxes that you're going to pay at the end of the year under the statute, okay? Incorporate as a business entity and make a lot of charitable contributions, which you get 90% back at the end of the year from. Okay? So that you can demonstrate when you apply for that license that Mr. To Uncle Sam, here's my paperwork, here's the application fee. Yes, I've been selling marijuana without a license for 20 years. I've been doing it, I'm guilty,
And let's take a step back. Who is the you that we're talking to in all of this? Let's be honest. The way that things tend to work in American society, we're not casting aspersions, we're not looking to create any bad guys. This is the way that it goes. It's called capitalism for a reason. It tends to be skewed in the favor of the people who already have the capital. Now, and this is why we're forming this partnership, our take is this. If we don't advocate on behalf of the people who right now are out on the street selling weed, who even according to this statute might still be breaking the law, but they're the ones who this legislation is intended to advocate on behalf of. However, if they don't have someone who knows how to walk them through the system and provide them the mechanisms to go legit, they're the ones who are going to get priced out and swept out of the market. The very people that this legislation is designed to benefit. Because they're not going to have the licensing fees. They're not going to know the process. They're not going to know how to set up the structure to go legitimate. And that's what we're looking to prevent.
Right, and so two things. One, you sold yourself short a little bit when you said, you're the tech person, et cetera, et cetera. You're more of like an entrepreneurial business strategist, and you're, what you do for small businesses, and you're networking, and what you're the way you're able to collaborate with multiple people on a given project. I mean, I think that's
okay, but it sounds better when you say it.
Well, that's really the value of it, because what you're also saying is you're getting into our strategy, which is 50% of the licenses are supposed to go toward what the state calls social equity applicants. As for the people who already have the capital, the venture capitalists from other states, how do the social equity applicants, the people who've already established the marketplace and literally gone to jail to maintain it, how do we protect those interests? As
the people who are currently selling all those people blazing up on the street the weed that we're walking by, puffs of smoke,
and that the venture capitalists are about to just come in and take. So it's like, as these people, they don't, all right. So the thought of filing their taxes, of going through the process of incorporation. Do you know that there's money in the statute earmarked for just as soon as you incorporate as a social equity applicant, you're eligible for funds under the statute?
Right. Well, you know that the average weed seller on the street doesn't know that.
I know that the average person doesn't know that.
Right.
This is why,
I know that because you told me.
Right, and this is why the legislation needs to be analyzed and comprehended. And what we're trying to do is essentially we're trying to create that class, and to empower that class so that they have so that when I speak to the district attorney in Manhattan or Brooklyn or Queens, when someone gets arrested or harassed, or when there's an issue for transporting product from New York to Colorado or vice versa, and there's some sort of federal legal implication, that we can now speak as a class, that we can negotiate with the legislature as one entity and have power in that conversation. This is the strategy that we're trying to approach the discussion from.
Right.
With one other significant nuance that we haven't brought up yet.
Okay, and what would that be, Sean?
Making the conversation to a certain degree about reparations, and bringing that into the subject matter, and maybe you want to expand.
And for those of you who just either took a breath or started cringing, let us explain and explore what we're talking about when we're talking about reparations.
As born-again capitalists, as people looking to protect our own interests here, and
people who are looking for where's our element, where's our dime, where's our profit.
And for me, as like a borderline libertarian conservative person who's crossed swords with you, many times when the conversation has come up in the abstract. But now we have a concrete example, I think, where we can have another.
Look, let's cut to the chase. I'm taking everyone at their best faces. There's a lot of people who, the issue with reparations isn't that ideologically they disagree with it. As born-again capitalists, let's cut to the chase. The amount of money that would be due to make reparations to the formerly enslaved and descendants of enslaved black Americans is usurious. Where are you going to get that much money? It would be in the multiples of trillions, and where's the revenue for that?
What the conservatives say, the criticism of any discussion about reparations is that's ultimately not workable.
Exactly.
In any sort of pragmatic sense.
Exactly. Well, let's call it the Evanston, Illinois precedent. Okay? What Evanston, Illinois said is, look, let's just take the revenue from taxing legal sales of marijuana, and that's a start. Look, whatever ills we're looking to repair and make restitution for took generations to come here. It's going to take generations to resolve it. So let's not expect any immediate miracles or quick flash solutions. So if we look at the root word of reparations being repair, how we repair the situation is, let's take on its best faith and on good faith, let's take this legislation as it's intended, at least as designed, to make reparations. Or at
least let's have that be a part of the conversation. It's not going to be resolved overnight.
No.
It's not the primary function, and it's not the only thing that we're discussing.
But it serves the dual purpose of, first of all, we stop penalizing, disproportionately black and brown people who are smoking, because as we say, just by the amount of people who are smoking weed, a lot of people can smoke weed, and they've been smoking weed forever. So why is it mostly black and brown people who end up being in prison for it? But we're not trying to have that conversation. We're saying now that we're looking not to wipe the slate clean, but to level the playing field more or less, let's stop using the sale, distribution, and possession of marijuana as an excuse to incarcerate people. And now that we've legalized it, let's take the tax revenue from that and apply it towards towards reparations.
And also the people who have to be
Yes.
the people, the social equity applicants.
Yes.
And the black community generally, looking to benefit from those reparations, also have to be the primary. Like one criticism of reparations that black people have is like, well, why are we always fundamentally excluded from the conversation to begin with anyway? So it's like, okay, you want to talk about reparations from Congress, from the Senate, and have, essentially that conversation and exclude. This is a way for the black community to take an active role and say, you know what, no, it's not about waiting for the government to hand it out.
Right.
I'm saying take that.
Exactly.
And then once you've taken it, not only pay the taxes to the government and expect the government to perhaps focus that in towards the black community like they said they were going to do. Black community.
Yeah.
Create with what we want to also create is what we're calling the Social Equity Alliance, the Five Boroughs Social Equity Alliance,
FBC.
the FBC, where we take those funds and direct it ourselves towards the communities that we want to impact. So, and you get 90% of that back from the government anyway at the end of the tax.
And as the saying goes, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So this is a chance for the people who normally are sitting at the door with their hat in hand to sit at the table. Now here's the thing, as the black guy in the conversation, telling tales out of school. As I said earlier, the root word of reparations is repair. And I'm saying this, I'm looking at the camera now, I'm saying this to my black brothers and sisters out there. This is not some government handout that we're talking about. This is an opportunity to generate the revenue to make the repairs in our own systems, our own societies, our own communities that need to be made. If this is looked at as just another government check at the first of the month and it goes to rims and tims and bitches and hoes, and I'm not going to apologize for the language, then that's just some straight bullshit, need not apply. Okay, the repairs that need to be made, the reparations that need to be made are reparations we need to make for our own selves. This is the government, getting out of the way and stop being the ones who are causing the problem and giving us the opportunity to make the reparations and build up our own communities. And that's going to be part of our ongoing conversation. This is not, like as Sean said, this is not about waiting for the government to fix a goddamn thing. This is about the government giving us the means and the methods to fix it for ourselves. And that's why we formed our partnership and the Five Boroughs Social Equity Alliance to create the mechanism for those who need to make the reparations, to have the system and the processes to make those reparations on their own behalf, to empower them.
Yeah, well, that was just, I think, the point to really emphasize is that they have, that they're the active agents in the process themselves, you know? And as far as the government goes, let's approach the conversation in good faith. Like you look at these kind of the rhetoric and the relationship between the left and the government right now on for instance the issues of race, and it's like incredibly adversarial. It's like ACAB, defund the police and this sort of thing. All right, look, you want to talk about things in the abstract, and then the conversation goes all over the place because you'll reduce the argument. You can, like, if you want to talk about the relationship between white people and black people in this country, you can reduce that argument in all sort of absurd directions. Look, we're talking about this particular marijuana legislation where the government, has passed it, and they seem to be doing the right thing. Moreover, I think the Republic, like everything I'm saying, I know if you say reparations, and it's like just like a hot button word. It's a trigger word, like abortion or gun control or something. It's like I'm automatically gonna. I think that this is something that take a breath. Take a breath. I think the Republicans should, like when I'm speaking now, I'm speaking to Ben Shapiro and AOC. I'm saying like you want to. What are the points around which the Republicans and Democrats are fighting? Abortion, gun. I mean, whatever. It's like. This is something that we should all be on the same page around, I think.
And something that we've had in our conversation, Sean, I'd like to bring up, and this is what really got me on board, is looking at this issue, even though, I know there's like my teetotaling, gateway drug, total zero tolerance folks out there who the minute you're talking about marijuana, it's the wacky tobacco, it's the devil's weed, whatever have you. But when you brought up the fact that you see this as a patriotic issue, not an issue of the left or an issue of the right, but as a patriotic issue and a chance for New York in general, in specific, and the United States in general, to have a competitive stance in the face of the global legalization of marijuana that's coming anyway, and the billions of dollars of revenue this has
maybe $100 billion. Maybe, and what could we do with that? We could colonize, and what I'm saying is, as the pioneers of the industry, seize control of the conversation, seize control of the wealth and where that's going to be directed. Don't entirely rely upon the legislature to collect the taxes and distribute them in a way that's going to be the most beneficial. No. You take control of that through charitable contributions. Yes. A lot of you guys probably don't understand that when you make a charitable contribution, if I put $100 into a church or a food pantry or whatever, I get $90 of that back at the end of the fiscal year as a tax credit, as a write-off. So that's how you assume control over how the lion's share of what you're paying in taxes gets directed towards the proper channels that you would want. That's how you control that.
And this is where, as you mentioned, and again, thank you for the kind words. Is my particular skills and experience as a business advocate. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of education that needs to happen around money, particularly in quote-unquote minority communities, black and brown communities. Money is either a toy or a tool, and just as Sean said, you make charitable deductions, which on the face of them initially give you the opportunity to do good things with the money that you make. And then at the end of the day, you get the benefit of that. 90% of that comes back to you as a tax write-off at the end of the year. But if you're playing slippery and shady, if you're doing things off the books, not only are you hurting yourself, you're not taking advantage of the money game the way it's supposed to be.
And then also just in terms of our strategy and what you and I are trying to do specifically, if I'm representing a class of people, and I could say, listen, these people made $10 million in charitable contributions, and then the marijuana board turns around and isn't properly giving out the licenses. Right. Now we have a collective bargaining.
Yes. We get to make the argument based on the social impact.
Why haven't you given this person a license? He made $100,000 in charitable contributions.
Yes. And this speaks to your point of not waiting for the government to determine what's happening. We're going to take the steps and take the actions to drive not only the conversation, but to drive the implementation. This is our strategy.
Nationally as well. Yes. Not just in this, it's legal in New York, it's legal in California. It's a matter of time before it's legal in the entire continental United States, at which point it's a matter of time before it's legal across the entire planet. So how is that process going to go down? Are we going to just allow, the predatory venture capital? So they want to say, oh, it's marijuana. Well, what about tobacco and rum and all of the other things that marijuana? Let's have a new conversation about addiction and recovery. I'm not going to sit here and say marijuana is without.
There are issues.
You see me? To give you a sense, look, my other strategy, my business strategy, and our strategy is complete and total transparency, okay, in terms of, I'm not hiding anything anymore. I'm just not. I am a marijuana smoker. Cornell is straight edge now. Now, there was a time in our friendship where,
up until 2016,
if I was seeing you, we smoked enough marijuana over the course of 20 years to what, more than the gross domestic product of Colorado.
You could probably stick the tips of my hair in a bowl and get people high.
But now you're straight edge, and there's reasons why you're straight edge. There's reasons why you don't smoke marijuana.
Yes.
And it's like with me, I'm to be completely transparent. I've spent the better part of my adult life, grappling with addictions in one form or another, whether it was alcohol and cocaine and opiates and and going in and out of 12-step programs and whatnot, where they conflate everything. Yeah. Where it's like alcohol and marijuana are the same. And it's like
which anyone who knows both of the substances knows that's just bullshit.
The reason why they've arrived at those conclusions is we're gonna talk about this.
This is just a preview of what's going to come up in our subject.
Because it's time for society to have a new conversation. Marijuana is no longer legal. Yeah. All right. So can marijuana mitigate against heroin withdrawals? I think it can, but there needs to be studies. Yes. There needs to be, it's like if you're.
And that's a conversation I think that hasn't even been able to be engaged because of this bullshit marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug, it's all the same thing. And when we're coming from fairy tales and just say no scare tactics rather than a sane, pardon the pun, sober conversation about marijuana, then we can't have these real conversations. Sean is not saying, oh yeah, everybody split up and let your 6-year-old get high. We're not talking about 420 is every day on the calendar. That's not the conversation we're having. We're saying let's stop the nonsense and let's have a real, serious conversation.
Because the truth is that it's not as destructive as tobacco. It's out of all the substances one can abuse, and trust me, you can abuse marijuana. Marijuana abuse is,
It's a thing.
Is a real thing, and marijuana withdrawals are a real thing, and they.
And all you, my friend, it's a medicine. It comes out of the earth. Okay, stop that too. Let's all stop the nonsense all the way.
Well, but could it be like tobacco? The Native Americans saw tobacco as sacred medicine, and there was a whole the peace pipe was a whole religious thing that they tobacco was a sacrament. And of
course, the way they did it, it wasn't the manufactured, boosted nicotine and tar, commercially dispensed cigarettes.
I think tobacco as sacred medicine has kind of been lost on. I don't think it's possible to recover that kind of relationship right now. I do think it's possible to like when you are a heroin addict, when you're a crack addict, when you are an alcoholic. It's probably never going to be possible for you to touch that substance ever again without there being serious consequences. And alcohol, one is too many, 1,000 is never enough. You heard that before. It's true for tobacco. That's true for opioids. That's true for amphetamines, alcohol, and is that true for marijuana? I'm not convinced that it necessarily is. I think it's possible to, have a new conversation with marijuana. I think it's possible to go too far with marijuana and dial it back. I think it's possible to go from daily marijuana abuse to, all right, you know what, I'm going to have boundaries around this substance. I'm going to use it on the weekends. I want to, the next episode, I want to spliff up. I know I tried to convince you to because what I want to do, what I really want to do is I think the only way to properly analyze this legislation is over a joint,
Which is fine if he wants to blaze up. I have absolutely no problem with that.
But he's really, he's crossed the line into straight edge now since
2016, the end of 2016.
And I'm
and full disclosure, folks, it's not a 12-step thing for me. I'm not abstaining. I'm not a friend of Bill. I'm 60 years old. Mm-hmm. I was getting high since I was 17. So at 56, I'm just going to be honest with you folks, I felt it was a good run. It was about 40 years. I had lots of fun. I spent my 20s as a musician on the Jersey Shore. I got a lot of friends that are friends of mine to this day that we met, passing the Dutchie. I got no problem with it. Still love the smell of it. I have fond memories of all my usage of it. It's just, I'm done.
And your abuse, I think you might have teetered on alcohol abuse at various points.
No, booze was always just to say, I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to that. The central nervous system depressant component of alcohol I use to balance the slight tendency towards a little paranoid edge for the week.
Well, what I'm saying is though, marijuana for you never escalated to any real serious drug abuse, whereas for me, drug, I was much more of an alcoholic and a drug abuser than you were. But in terms of what I want to do now is I want to not smoke as much.
Right.
Try to have boundaries around it, and I think that is possible. But I see what I'm like, even when you let yourself go into just unmitigated marijuana abuse. That is a orders of magnitude removed from what alcohol, what tobacco. My sponsor in AA from recently, he was a smoker and he ended up suffering a massive stroke, recovered, but then went right back to smoking.
Look, I
suffered another massive stroke, and now he's smoking really messed him up, man.
I lost my stepfather to lung cancer in I believe '94, and my mother just recently passed, this February in fact, from lung cancer. That was her third bout with cancer. Her second bout with cancer was nasomaxillary cancer from the secondhand smoke of when my youngest brother was born. My stepfather hotboxed in the bedroom to not expose him to the smoke. So basically, my mother breathed in every puff of smoke he breathed out, and she lost the left palate in their head because
secondhand smoke.
secondhand smoke.
Because
Yeah.
if you're living with a smoker, it's like
Yeah.
it's not like passing through a cloud of smoke. When you live with that, it's toxic.
You're smoking every cigarette they
And I
smoke.
mean, I in terms of all the substances that I've abused over the years, it's like, and then there's a push towards legalization around psychedelic drugs that I've taken an interest in.
Me too.
Do I want to see that? The Republicans always would or the conservatives would say, it's a slippery slope, right? And there's some currency to that. Like what do we think about heroin, crystal meth? We were talking about this the other day. I do not want to see our streets flooded with every, like with every drug known to man. I do not like a punitive system of justice. I do not think throwing people in prison does good things for society. And, when it comes to personal choices around drugs, I don't think we need to have a whole prison industrial complex to deal with that, okay?
And the interesting thing, even though I'm the straight edge person in the conversation, when it comes to other substances, I must confess I'm a bit of a social Darwinist. I am kind of the mind of legalize everything. And I say that with the understanding that initially you're going to get an increase in overdose deaths, especially with cocaine and heroin and whatever have you. And honestly, the way I feel about it is, I feel that is what's going to happen. And afterwards, I see that's going to decrease because we're going to start managing it rather than punishing it. Now, we can circumvent that, as you said, and in our recent conversation, I've sort of modified my take on things. If we get away from a punitive system of justice in dealing with it, if we deal with chemical use and abuse as a medical issue and a psychological issue and not as a legal issue, then we begin to treat people rather than punish them.
They're starting to do that to a certain extent. Like if you go to a state-funded Medicaid, rehab, most of the people there are court mandated. So what they are starting to do is process drug violations through drug court. So if you're caught selling heroin, for instance, at least the first several times, you have the opportunity of going through rehab and completing a program as opposed to going to prison. So that is starting to happen. What I'm saying is, look, if they want to have draconian drug policies around crystal meth and heroin and even psychedelics and mushrooms and LSD, fine. Marijuana is in the class of all of that. I'm not going to say it's harmless because it's not. But
it's probably in the same class as cigarettes and beer. In fact, my joke always used to be that a joint is like smoking a beer.
I would say it's worse.
Well, yeah, but
I'm not saying beer and cigarettes are worse.
Yeah. But again, I'm just making it for the purposes of comparison, not the judgment. Then basically my argument being, if cigarettes and beer are legal, which they are, then there's no justification in my mind, given the effect, for marijuana to be illegal. Now, no one is advocating that people who can't handle it go out there and drink. No one is saying let a 10-year-old drink. So we're saying, yes, you have to have restrictions and a logical approach towards it. But if, here in New York, I can go to any bodega, which is, there's one almost every corner, and I can buy a 6-pack of beer. I can buy a wine cooler. I can buy a pack of cigarettes. So, actually now, you can go and buy marijuana.
Yeah, actually, it's more common now. I don't, and what I'm saying is I don't want that to be true of heroin and crystal meth. I don't want heroin and crystal meth to be common.
And that's inside, again, I don't know that that's necessarily in the purview of our conversations, but that is a bigger conversation, which to me, it's not about substances. It's about, and this is why it's kind of too deep for what we're looking to get into here in our ongoing series.
You're right.
It's, why are people abusing substances? Why is there an opioid crisis? Why is there the crystal meth explosion out there in the Midwest and the Plain States?
Well, and then what I'm saying is that marijuana can mitigate against that, as it has for me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it, to the extent that I'm abusing a substance better.
What's that term that you use?
Harm reduction.
Thank you.
Well, that has to do with like giving. That language is described like giving heroin abusers clean needles, because now you're slowing the spread of AIDS, etc. I think like this marijuana, I think could it's like harm reduction, but to the next exponent. Because if you're going,
mitigation therapy, I don't know if that's a term, but we could.
Well, if you're going from being look, nobody, I've been, and heroin is, we are dealing with an opioid pandemic. COVID is like, that was a surprise and everybody had to adjust, but heroin is like a much bigger problem than COVID ever was. Like you go to rehab, and I've been to rehab a few times, and everybody is in there for opioids. And I live on 23rd Street and 8th Avenue. Twice this past month, when I was getting off the subway, I saw people shooting up right on the steps during normal business hours, not at 3 o'clock in the morning, okay? So
I haven't seen stuff like that since like the 80s and 90s on the Lower East Side when I was hanging out with my punk rocker friends who were squatting abandoned buildings.
But what I'm saying to the marijuana vendors and operators is have a little Carnegie in you in terms of compete against the heroin addicts and the cartels and say, look, my junkie friend, do what they used to characterize the drug dealers doing in high schools of like, go to your junkie and say, here's some free marijuana, eat this edible. Yeah. And if it helps you with the withdrawals, come back to me and buy my edibles before you go.
Destroy yourself.
Before you buy heroin, and it's like.
Because you're not going to stop doing something, but do something that hurts you less.
I'm saying that, like, I've taken edibles, man, and I used to, to go back to my relationship with substances, marijuana's always been my go-to thing. I love smoking marijuana. That's what I need, like, every once in a while, the alcoholic, the heroin addict, they need to really get whacked, there's a part of that brain, that lizard, that wants to drink to excess, that wants to really get, take a bunch of edibles, man, and be high for 7-8 hours, and
go on a bender.
Go on a bender, and you will wake up the next day and go to work with marijuana. Whereas with alcohol and other stuff,
lost weekend.
Lost weekend. So that's kind of, that's my theory at a macro level, at a snapshot. I want to shift the conversation a little bit and talk about. Perhaps wrap up the conversation in terms of, what's our role? What are we doing for people? Like, what are we really, like you said, you're a tech guy, and I said you're actually much more than that.
I'm a business development advocate. We
put the
No, I am a advocate for business development specifically for solo entrepreneurs and small business owners and operators. And that's what I've been for probably the past 7 or 8 years. And this is the natural synergy between, what Sean and I are doing. This is the nature of which he pulled me into this concept. And this is why it resonates with me. Again, I'm straight edge, so it's not about me spliffing up, but I love the weed, I just don't do it anymore. And I really see how this is an opportunity, and it's really Sean who enlightened me into this isn't just, as a born-again capitalist, which I coined that phrase, of how I can find my percentage of it, but this is also, as I say, you can see from the long hair, I'm a postmodern hippie. I was born in 1960, so too old to be a hippie, too young to be a hippie, too old to be a hipster. But this is a chance to do well and do good at the same time, to make a buck and to help make positive change in the world.
And if you went through your pedigree more, you sell yourself short. You've designed major networking things that for thousands of users at any given time, earning over $100,000 a year at given point.
My background is in self-taught systems, Unix system administrator, starting in 1993. Worked for Lehman Brothers, PaineWebber during the Y2K conversion. Last full-time job was an architectural firm that supported Spielberg, Seinfeld, Yale University, W Hotel chain, and the United Nations. So I know a little bit about technology.
Yeah, well, because I, as a lawyer, and then I also worked on Wall Street for a number of years, and in terms of business development, business analytics, competitive business intelligence, and at the high level, in terms of what we want to do, these are turnkey solutions, right? Yes. This is an ongoing. We don't know exactly what the legislation is going to do. We don't know how the government's going to react. We have some basic ideas in terms of the kind of like baseline fundamental offerings that we want to give people. Website. We're going to build a website for people, incorporate for them, set up bank accounts and point of sale systems, and put them in a position to, the other thing that I haven't discussed is the other kind of, which I'm reluctant to say in too much detail because I don't want people, right now the market hasn't caught up, but to sell on the web. There's an avenue to do that at this point.
And that's in terms of our Green Kalish partnership. But before we close, let's talk about what we're going to be doing vis-a-vis the legislature with this ongoing series.
Right. Well, educating I'm not sure exactly.
No, basically what we're going to do, because here's the thing, folks. as Sean said, it's about 150 pages, but let's be real. I don't care what act of legislature you're talking about. We all know that almost nobody, and that's including the lawyers who are going to have to speak on behalf of it, or pro or con, the judges who are going to, nobody actually reads these things, not every single word of it. What we're going to do is we're going to read through, well, Sean's going to read through and analyze it, and we're going to have a conversation about it. We're going to read through the entire legislature, not in one sitting.
Well, hopefully, I want to get through some, I don't want it to be a 30 million hour series. No. I want it to be, like, I want to attract a viewership. Yes. And I want you to be able to say, okay, I'm a marijuana operator, or I'm a judge, right, or I'm whomever, and I actually listened to this series from beginning to end, and I now have, like, a comprehensive understanding of what the New York legislation means in the context of, well, in a few different contexts, in terms of the local economy, right, in terms of what it means in New York State, the federal, Republic of the United States, and also the international community. Right. And we're going to, invite guests on. I hope, we're opening this up to legal experts and, right, and
So if you're watching this now, when we publish this, we're going to give contact information. Feel free to reach out to us.
And we want, and we want to have, focus a special, special attention to obviously to our clients, right, and to the class that we're looking to represent here. So yeah, I mean, that's essentially what we're trying to do. But the thing to just keep remembering is, like, in terms of the specific offerings, is that what's required here is real-time strategic thinking and turnkey solutions. So, yes, we want to be your partner in, yes, this ongoing campaign that's going to be years. It's, yes, not going to be resolved in tomorrow. Even, in terms of how long is it going to take for marijuana legalization to sweep across the entire country? 5 years, 10 years, 20? I don't know. It's
going to take a couple of years just for New York to figure out, from the legislature to the actual practical implementation, what that's going to look like.
Well, and we want to, in the course of our conversation, have an active role, yes, in that, yes, process. And yes, by enabling the class, focusing, again, to reiterate, we do want to focus especially on the social equity, yes, applicants, but we also want to focus on anybody who's open to our, sure, grand strategy, our bigger strategy.
Well, that's why it's an alliance. Yeah. Everyone, however tangentially involved, who this speaks to, in whatever it is, whatever skills, whatever calling, whatever community it is that you serve, that's why it's an alliance. And what we're looking to do here, is to take steps towards a practical implementation. What we're not looking to do is have another abstract, jaw-jacking, chin-wagging conversation, sitting around in a circle jerk, just, pontificating. What can be done right now, while New York is figuring it out, what can be done right now to position the people we're advocating for so that they will be in the best situation when New York figures it out, right, and gets themselves an application, right, to be at the table and not on the menu.
Be active now. Not 18 months from now when it's time to apply for a license now.
Because that's too late.
No,
that's what the guys with the money, the venture capitalists, are already going to have swooped in, because trust me, that's what they're doing right now.
Well, and it's not even like they're consciously being racist or malevolent.
No, they're not the enemy.
No.
They're just the opportunists. They're because they're going to do, because that's what they're geared to do. They're, right, venture capitalists. So they've got the capital, and they're just, here's another opportunity. They're going to exploit another opportunity.
But why shouldn't this situation, $100 billion a year is up for grabs. You, yes, think there isn't going to be a major grappling process, but the thing that's interesting about marijuana is this is not cocaine. If this were cocaine, it would be about the guns. If this were tobacco, it would be about the guns.
Yeah.
But interestingly, marijuana has never been about the guns, which is why the legislation has always been bullshit. Yeah. And it's always been about something other than what we were talking about before, the parens patriae doctrine. Yeah. So marijuana legislation, drug legislation generally, it's about the state, playing the role of parents, protecting the citizens because they're children who don't know how to act and they're going to hurt themselves. That's true for heroin, for crystal meth, yeah, and for, like I said, I do not want to see that in the bodega where next to my marijuana.
The works next to your vape pen.
I don't want to see. I don't want that to happen. Now, but so that is what the state is doing when it comes to those drugs. But it's, right, never been that about marijuana. No. It's always been about things like breaking up, protesters and during the 60s
Exactly.
when it was like anti-war protesters.
It was a way to go after the hippies and the long hairs and the peaceniks, and before that, as we discussed in the 40s, it was because in the jazz era, you had black folks and white folks hanging out, and they were smoking the reefers.
And you can't have that. You can't. So it's always been chicken crap legislation.
Yeah.
And now, but you know what? There's no point in punishing everybody who passed the original legislation is
Exactly.
gone.
They're dead or they're gone.
So
yeah,
the New York legislation, Colorado, California, you know what? Most of this was Democrat. What I'm saying to the Republicans now is, guys, you want do you really want to put yourself in an advert? Do you really want to dig your heels in the sand and say, no, marijuana isn't, we need to fight this trend, it's a slippery, or do you want to say, you know what?
Yeah. Because it's gonna happen.
So
It's
Republicans,
gonna happen.
Examine the legislation with us. Where could it be done differently? I'm personally very impressed with what they did. I think they walked a very careful line of of laissez-faire policy, where you're letting the market kind of do what it's doing naturally, while at the same time protecting, what they're calling social equity applicants, which is essentially just the people who are already operating.
Yeah.
It's a way to protect them from the predatory venture capitalists, I think, and the Republicans who, I think they all did a good
And
job
look,
here.
as a born-again capitalist, I'm talking to you conservative people, whatever ticket you click or whatever column you check when you vote. This is about revenue. America, in the beginning, there were 13 colonies, not 13 republics. It's always been about the money. This is, as Sean says, this is a patriotic issue.
Mm-hmm.
This is an opportunity for the United States of America to make significant revenue, which is going to benefit the state, the community, and the people. Okay? So let's get past, we're not saying you have to spliff up. You don't. Okay? But let's stop fighting this. It costs more money to lock people up and put them in prisons than to let it be sold. Because look, just because there's breweries and distilleries doesn't mean that we're saying, okay, let everybody get shit-faced drunk and beat up their girlfriends. So obviously we're going to have to monitor and maintain these. But y'all still tax that liquor. You still tax those cigarettes. You still got those stamps on the cigarettes, right? So this is what we're talking about. Legalize it and reap the benefits as the state with those tax revenues, because that's your job, is to levy taxes and collect revenues. So let's do that.
Yeah, and do it but as far as like the Republicans and are concerned, there's no reason for them to oppose what we're talking about.
So be on the right side of history.
So be on the right side of history. Democrats, Republicans, this is something that we should all be able to, come together around and work
work. It just occurred to me, there's a lot of people in the Farm Belt that they got lots of acres of land that are kind of lying fallow, and currently the government's paying them subsidies not to grow.
What about using greenhouse spaces in the winter on on buildings and in terms of and incorporating marijuana into the whole climate change conversation, and in terms of decreasing the carbon footprint. I mean, this is all and applying some of that revenue towards what AOC called the Green New Deal.
You could have training programs for kids, and these are transferable skills, not just for hydroponically growing marijuana, but just hydroponic growth. Because look, let's face it, the world's facing a population boom. We're going to have to learn. What if every city could hydroponically grow food?
Well, that's what, when I say, I just realized as the words came out of my mouth, when I mentioned AOC's Green New Deal, it's like, well, the entire class of half of the country who's conservative is throwing their hands up going, why would you, well, but this is my point. With the revenue from marijuana, what previously were unworkable, extravagant ideas might actually become more tenable and possible. It's not that you hate the Green New Deal on its face. It's because you think that
you have reasonable rejections of how this is going to be funded. Is this another pie in the sky? Yeah, that's a nice idea, but who's going to pay for it?
Like the conversation around reparations.
Yes.
So I think reparations is something that I can kind of, in our conversations, we've wrapped our brain around, and we've thought it out more fully in terms of our business plan. Our podcast series, etc.
Yeah.
I don't really know much about climate change and green legislation and reducing the carbon footprint, but I do know that that certainly could be a part of this conversation.
And it's an extension of something that we've discussed off camera, is when you said, let's have New York not just make the billions of dollars of tax revenues, but let New York
Do it.
Be an exemplar, be an example of how to make this change and how to engage in new conversations and lead the world in this. It can be just so. Let's take that out another order of magnitude, and let's let this whole new conversation about marijuana give us an example of how to departisanize things and take things out of this knives out, go for the jugular partisan nature, which has poisoned American politics to the point that I'm just like a pops on both your houses. Let's come together and find solutions rather than find ways we can snipe at the guys on the other side of the aisle and score cheap bullshit points on social media as how we can cut them down.
And let's protect our own interests in the process as well. It's like that's the one thing that the social justice warriors, I think, miss. It's like, okay, you're campaigning on these ideas of like social equity, etc. But it's like at the end of the day, who's is it paying your bills? Can everybody who is selling marijuana, and even people who are not selling marijuana, it's like the gold rush. Yeah. It's time to think about going to California. So,
and see, that's why I coined the term born-again capitalist. Because again, it's just, there's a lot. Look, I consider myself left of center. I voted Democrat all my life and then probably always will. However, I'm also a pragmatist, and capitalism is not bad. Corporations are not evil. Some of them are poorly run, and some of the people who run them are stupid. But at the end of the day, show me a society or a civilization that doesn't require money, and I'm the first one to sign up. But as far as I know right now, it takes money to pay the bills, and there's no such thing as a broke philanthropist. So even if I want to do good things, I got to make money first.
But this is a way for us to have a meaningful conversation around wealth. Yes. Not for everybody, obviously, but if New York City is flooded with, what are they saying, $6 to $10 billion in 2021, 2022, what does that mean?
That's a conservative estimate, and it's only going to go up.
What does that mean? It can mean a number of different things, right? If predatory out-of-state venture capitalists take it and then invest all of their money overseas, it doesn't mean much for New York City.
Nothing's going to change here except a handful of people are going to get rich, just like every other boom that comes.
But if as much of that wealth, if 100% of that wealth, or close to 100% of that wealth, goes into the pockets of New Yorkers who are then going to reinvest that money into the community, then we have if in other words, if we made, let's say, if there were, 1,000 black millionaires that become millionaires off of the marijuana industry in the next year in the neighborhood of Harlem, for instance. If that were to happen, and they were to then focus all of their earnings into their, shop locally,
it's the so-called multiplier effect.
What would that literally would have a a Reaganomics trickle down effect throughout that marketplace. That would have a transformational effect on the neighborhood and the community.
And that's what I'm talking about earlier when I say reparations has got to be about making repairs. If it's just a handful of thugs coming in there looking how they can stack their chips and pile their paper, stack their paper, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about rims and Timbs and fly cars and fly bitches. I'm not talking about that.
But you know what though?
Because as I say, and I'm talking to my black peoples out there, man. I have a saying: criminals go to jail, gangsters go legit. That's why I'm talking specifically to you brothers and sisters out there who are out on the streets currently selling the weed. We're looking for a way for y'all to go legit, not just so that you can make more money and continue doing the same old stupid things, but so that you can legitimize yourself and legitimize your communities. Okay, you're out there, brothers and sisters out there, fighting over turf where you don't own a single square foot of ground. How about you make enough money to buy your hood, and then it is your hood, and then you hold the leases, you own the stores, and guess what? Your property taxes are paying the police who patrol your neighborhoods. So now they ain't throwing you up against the wall with no stop and frisk. They're saying, "Good evening, Mr. Jones. How are you doing tonight?" That's what I'm talking about.
Well, you're right, and that was it was actually something that you brought up a little while back in terms of wealth and money.
Yes.
And what does that mean? Like money, like you guys, people, people chase the money.
Yes.
Right. From the gangsters to the Wall Street, they're chasing money. They want to put as much money in the bank as possible. No, what you want to chase is the actual wealth itself.
Yes.
Okay, what has wealth? Well, for instance, if we have a good podcast series, something as abstract as a discussion
that has value could be monetized.
Marijuana is a commodity that has value. What you just mentioned, houses, titles to property, equity in companies, this is what we're looking to organize and create, and to create a momentum, so that marijuana is essentially building that generational wealth.
And for the first time, this is not some namby-pamby, pie-in-the-sky, do-gooder, starry-eyed conversation. This is actual, practical, factual, tactical process that can actually be done. As Sean constantly likes to point out, we're talking about a cash crop. We're talking about real, something substantive. Not a dream, not an idea, not a hope. We're talking something that's right now. Marijuana is a plant that can be grown. It can be grown anywhere, and has the potential to have tens of billions of dollars
in this state alone.
In this state alone in legitimate revenue. But my brothers and sisters out there, if you just sit here and you just egg off this conversation and let the people who already have the money come in and make more money off of it, then that's your loss. And the reason that we're sitting here in front of this camera having this conversation, we're going to do this podcast series, is because we're here talking to you. Look, we all have already, both of us have opportunities where we could make money ourselves. So we're 100% transparent with you. Part of our interest in this is that we see a way where we can make a buck.
Yeah, of course. That's a primary interest in terms of in terms of our goals as entrepreneurs. Like you and I, the conversation, we've been friends for 20 years.
Yeah.
And our conversation has evolved from just hanging out in bars and the art scene to, art and talking about art and culture to, I went to law school and now we're having much more meaningful conversations about politics to now, exploring a business partnership. And we've explored that in the past as well. But this is, like I said, this is the gold rush of our time, and this is the.
And that's an apt analogy. This is a moment in time that this window of opportunity is not going to stay open forever. Now it's a level playing field, but eventually, it's going to the players are going to be established, and if you miss the rush, game over.
Well, it's like once they start issuing licenses, they're already harassing people on the street for selling drugs for selling marijuana on the street. Already on Broadway and places where
they're trying to sweep them out and move in the legitimate people who have the licenses. Who, if we don't take action, if you don't take action, it's going to be the people who already have money.
Well, see, because what I would like to do is represent all of them as a class, so that I can go to the district attorney and say, why don't you just leave them alone until? Why don't you leave anybody selling? If you're not selling to kids or violating the statute, if you're operating, if the only violation is you're selling without a license.
So you're operating within the spirit of the law, if not in the letter of the law.
No,
we're asking the law to be flexible.
Well, on that issue.
Right, exactly.
Or if it's 12 to 18 months, that you can't expect people who've been selling marijuana, paying their rent, selling marijuana for the past 20 years to stop. Until
what it is? Remember, I mentioned my time hanging out in the Lower East Side. I got a friend who back in '83 I was hanging out with who squatted a building on 2nd Street and Avenue A, which is now a condo, and she owns that condo because she got grandfathered in because she squatted it and they didn't kick her out. She went legit. This is what we're saying. Those folks out there, don't sweep them out, grandfather them in.
Well, right, because otherwise they're going to just be... Exactly. In other words, you have a certain market share right now. There are people that you are selling marijuana to, and that's your market share. If you do what we say, if you go legit, if you incorporate, if you build a website, if you make charitable contributions and put aside funds for taxes, that little market share that you have will grow as the entire industry continues to grow. If you are conscious and strategic in your decision making in this critical 12 to 18 month period, if you just allow the chips to fall where they may, hey, you might be able to weather the storm for a little while, but probably what's going to happen is what you have worked for is going to be taken from you. So I would say, whether marijuana, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing, I don't know. But why should what you've worked for be taken away from you by someone just because they have money and you don't?
Exactly. And if you don't come together as a class, you're just one individual against the machine, and you've seen this movie before in America, you know how that's going to work out. And that's why we're forming the 5 Boroughs Social Equity Alliance. We want to bring, this is what Sean means when he says he wants to represent y'all as a class of people. One of y'all, they're just going to tell us to go fuck ourselves. But 1,000 of y'all, that's a class action.
And let's make that as meaningful of a conversation as possible. So it's like when you and I have crossed swords in the past about race or whatever, and you talk about, and I've perhaps minimized and I felt you've maximized things, and and it's like we're talking about history in the abstract. This is history in the most specific, in other words,
This is history in the making.
so what happened historically in terms of that set the stage for systemic racism, redlining, well, slavery itself, right? And
Jim Crow
and all of that. Okay, well now we have marijuana legalization. Now is a meaningful now what happens? And I'm saying, you know what? Let's approach this conversation in good faith and say, everybody who passed the Jim Crow legislation, they're all dead. You know what? And everybody now, and are there racist white people? Sure. But it's not like it was. It's not like nobody wants to see slavery. Nobody wants
There's not fire hoses and attack dogs.
Nobody wants
There's nobody hanging from a tree when you come home.
And actually, it's interesting. I'm going to digress for a moment because I think it's relevant. It's like when I met real racists for the first time was when I went to rehab, and I met actual Nazis, not like, straight up like AB, swastika tattooed on the chest, like, and what I found with them was they were more or less like, it was a street gang type situation, and it was about economics and survival, and the politics was really, secondary to all of that, which is to say, I just don't think that there's this kind of animus, racial animus, that can't be overcome here. That we can't if we contextualize things properly.
Right.
In other words, when I say reparations, and it's like the most racists who would turn around and say to me, "Don't even talk that that critical race theory shit to me." It's like, actually, I think if you sit down and think about this, you want to have a meaningful conversation about reparations. You actually do. If you could, like, in other words, if I could pay $5, and that's my Sean Kalish reparations fee, no black person can ever call me a racist ever. Wouldn't I want to pay that $5? Obviously, that's not.
We're speaking it kind of a little flippantly, but no, I take your meaning.
Even the hardcore racists with the swastikas on their arm, I think, could get on board with. Obviously, that's like the very.
So look, at the end of the day, other than the handful of people who are really dyed-in-the-wool ideological racists, and there's nothing you can do about them. Most people that we call racists are really, it's really tribalism.
No,
and they fall into a us versus them. If you attack me and call me a thing, I'm going to dig in and double down, and I'm going to lash back.
You call me a white devil, I'll call you a black devil.
Exactly.
You call me a black devil, I'll call you a cracker, and then it escalates.
But if you say, hey, okay, Mr. White Guy, I don't know you from a hole in the wall. All I'm saying is, give me a shot, let me sell my weed legally, let me pay my taxes, and stop hassling.
Well, and because what happened in the past, during Jim Crow eras, was when black people kind of postured up, after having a boot on their neck, slavery, they postured up to like, okay, let me apply for a loan to get a house. Let me apply for, all of the things that I need to do to then create like a meaningful legacy for my children. They were just denied that opportunity, right? So what was redlining? Redlining was basically when it said if you're in a particular area,
we're not giving you loans, we're not going to give you opportunities, or we're going to marginalize you to the shittiest areas that we even going to allow you to have property.
Okay, so now I'm a white person generations later. It's like I look at that and I'm like, oh shit, that's bad. But I don't want to have to like pay out of my pocket and take responsibility for that, because that was, and I don't want to deal with your anger over, your legitimate anger over that, because I wasn't necessarily responsible. So I'm saying, if there's a way for us to, take the whole issue of marijuana, and at least in New York where we live, and apply that towards mollifying some of the racial tensions that have been building up for the past, several centuries, if we can, literally smoke a joint and kind of relax about that a little bit, I'd say that in terms of our, like, as a mercenary, as someone who's looking to protect my own interests, that's a pretty cool job for me to like dedicate some of my energy.
And as we've said in our conversation in the past and off camera, at least to our take on things, reparation is not about making restitution for the past, because that's impossible. The past is past. Reparations are about repairing the now and building a better future.
Have you blue line the red line? Now, centuries later.
Thank you.
So, how do you do that? Literally, I don't know. But let's start talking about that. And now
let's have that be the conversation.
If I have $10 million, like if there's an if the 5-borough equity alliance proceeds in the way that I want to.
Five Social Equity Alliance.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I speak with I'm like Ben Shapiro, I talk to guys. We will have real resources to do that in a meaningful way. Well, okay, you want to talk about redlining? Across the street's the projects right over there. That's a pretty consolidated area. What can we do for that community so that their children are not living in the same conditions that they are? What can be, and there are answers to that. They're not easy, right? They're not easy, and it requires the action and the buy-in from the community itself, right? You can't, come in and expect the government to save them, But now is the opportunity for us to say, you know what, we can have a meaningful conversation around that. So that's essentially what we're trying to do here. We're trying to develop community. We're trying to work with our clients on a turnkey basis. What do you need over the next 5 to 10 years is, there's what we're going to do for you immediately. Build you a website, incorporate, set up a point-of-sale system, set up legitimate bank accounts and all of that. But more than that, we're going to be your strategic.
Then we're going to advocate for you as a class and intervene against the pushback that, first of all, we're hoping the pushback doesn't come. But we've seen this movie before. So in the event that it does, we're looking at what are the steps. And one thing Sean's going to do is talk to the district attorneys and say, look, can we just get you to agree that if these folks stay within the letter of the law, they're like you said, you're not going to sell in their schools, you're not going to sell to underage people, but aren't these the people, the very people this legislation is designed to intervene on behalf of? So then let's grandfather them in, stop hassling them, and let them just like my friend who squatted a building illegally for years, and now she's the legal owner of that apartment as a condominium. Let them transform their, like the saying of our website, out of the gray into the black.
And if the district attorney has other ideas, he'll take me a lot more seriously if I have 100 people under my wing. He might say, look, all right, fine, do this, do that, and the other.
Right.
My theory, though, I didn't actually say this explicitly. My theory in terms of looking at this, and I have to be careful in terms of how I say this, but I think that more or less is the position of the district attorney and law enforcement in the state of New York right now, is that they're more or less I go down to Washington Square Park and you have people selling marijuana on tables in the street in front of the cops, and and processing the payment with Venmo and whatnot, and there's no flack at all. So we have a plan. To take that to the next level.
And the time is now, my friends. If you're out there, if you're watching this, and you're out there selling dime bags on the street, hit us up.
We have a plan. You say, you're a little bit more than a tech person. You're more of a technology strategist, right? And in terms
of a business development specialist.
And well, on the digital side, what that means is, how to actually make a sale using a computer. That's essentially what he understands. There's the Wall Street methodology of picking up a phone and making a sale on the phone, and then there's the digital side,
and more to that, also the process of, and again, that's another conversation. Which tune in, because we're going to be doing this on a regular basis. The whole process of just what it means to be a business. Forget what type of business, because I've been, as I said, I've been working in tech for 28 years. I've been my own business for the past 10, going on 11 years. I started as a result of the subprime mortgage meltdown. I told you my last full-time job was an architectural design firm, actually quite near here, in Hell's Kitchen, 36th Street and 10th Avenue, called Guacmi, Siegel & Associates. And their clients were Steven Spielberg, Jerry Seinfeld, the United Nations, W Hotel Chain, Yale University. I was their IT manager, which means that I supported everything from the internet to the desktop. Servers, workstations, software, hardware, user accounts, data backup, the whole nine. That job got taken away because the subprime mortgage meltdown melted down the entire economy in 2008, 2009, and they had to let me go. So I have been working for myself as a small business for the past 10 years. 10 years ago, I didn't know jack shit about what it meant to be a business. I worked all of my life. I knew what it was to be an employee. I knew what I was good at, but what does it take to now take those skills, find out who my market is, find out how to market that to anybody, find out how to price it, how to fulfill on closing the deals. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be understood. Here's the thing.
And how to use technology to accomplish that.
All you guys out there have to do is transition that digitally, because that's what you've been doing. This is what I mean, my brothers and sisters, when I say gangsters go legit. You're not gangsters. You're not thugs. You're not criminals. You are businessmen. If you are running, if you're making 6 figures or more a year selling weed, you're doing better than some people with MBAs who have titles.
So, but the question is, if you're making that right now, and been doing that for 10 to 20 years, you've been making $60,000 to $100,000 a year,
Yeah.
you should be able to turn that now, in the next 12 to 18 months, times a factor of 10.
Yes.
You should be able to go from 100,000 to $1 million a year, I think,
Yeah.
easily.
And as Sean said, it's not about chasing the money, it's about the wealth. You should be able to, which you've never been able to do before, you should be able to have a legitimate business that you can leave on to your descendants when you pass from this earth.
Right, no more, you can be your someone that you're, whereas in the past, you wouldn't necessarily want your mother or father to know what you're doing for a living. Now you can say, look, the other thing we're doing is we're putting ourselves on the vanguard here.
Yeah.
That's our business plan.
Yeah.
That's how we plan on making our money. So in other words, everything we're saying that you should be doing, we're kind of going public and saying, look, so in other words, if there's any pushback from the government,
we're going to be who they push first.
so we're going to, so in other words, what we want to do is we want to set up the web infrastructure for the New York five borough social equity applicants to conduct as much business as possible online. That's one thing that we want to do, and that's going to be our baby. So if the cops don't like that, they're coming for me a lot sooner than
they're knocking on his door because I'm not going to tell them where I live.
But then I'll be able to, and I expect that it's going to be a process. This is not going to be easy, but. So a lot of you are just going to be like, whatever, let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
Those of you who file your taxes, who set up bank accounts, who do what we say, will put yourselves in a position to have, as Cornell said, generational wealth that you can pass off to your children or to your heirs, whatever, whoever they may be.
Yeah.
That's what we're offering. That's what our consulting services are about. It's about creating generational wealth from the marijuana industry. I think that pretty much captures what we're looking to communicate.
You want to put it in straight talk, folks. This is your 40 acres and a mule. And use the mule to plow the 40 acres and plant your wheat.
And then to get a little slogan-y, let us take you out of the gray
and into the black.